let's take a little time and talk about my 4-stroke nitro-powered Losi LMT monster truck. I already did a video on this truck with Greg Vogel from RC Driver, so if you want to go and see that quick video that we did, go over to the RC Driver YouTube channel and check it out. By the way, if you haven't been on Greg's YouTube channel yet, go check out RC Driver. Greg Vogel is a magazine guy like me, unlike a lot of people on YouTube, sadly, a lot of people on YouTube. Greg Vogel does a great job at explaining things. He gives you good information, and he has a lot of great stuff on his channel, so make sure you check that out. Now, this engine that I'm talking about in the truck here is a Toyan 4-stroke nitro engine, and this is something that Greg did a review on his channel, and I got talking to him about it. Back in the day, I took a Tamiya Ford Aeromax and put a OS 4-stroke in it. That was when OS was trying to get that 4-stroke thing going with nitro cars and so on. And I put one in a Ford Aeromax 18-wheeler from Tamiya, and the problem I had with it was cooling. It worked, it ran, it had an awesome exhaust system and everything, but it wouldn't stay cool no matter what I did. And technology back then wasn't as good as it is now. So today I probably could have had it running pretty well with the fans that are available and so on. But the nice thing about the Toyan engine is it's water cooled. So I said, Greg, why don't you put it in an 18-wheeler and do the same thing I did, but now you can make it much, much better. Well, we got to talking about it. Next thing you know, he says, you're gonna build the project and you're gonna put it in a Losi LMT. So that's what I did. And I'm gonna show you all the little things that I did to not only get that engine to fit, but to get it to look cool and factory at the same time. The body I chose for this truck is a J Concepts Ford Raptor. I really like the trophy truck look of this. It's actually quickly becoming one of my favorites. I have this on 2 other trucks that are my race trucks. Really love the look, and I thought it'd be great for this project. I used Tamiya spray paint to paint this body, and it's a paint that I actually use quite often. I really like the Tamiya paints all around. They just all spray very well, and I like the finish that I get out of them. And this one, really like this color and the gray that goes with it. All the logos, actually not all the logos, but most of the logos, the RC Driver logos, the Hitmansky Hobbies logos, the Toyan logos, and the Thumper logo are all painted on. It's something I do with my vinyl cutter. It's very easy. I just make a stencil out of some Parma uncut mask. I make sure I rub it down really well and there are no edges lifting, and spray away. And yeah, everybody thinks I do everything with airbrush, but this body is actually all spray paint. The cutouts in the back of the body allow the engine to breathe, and it gives me a way to get to the fuel tank quickly so I could just fill it up and keep running. For this project, I chose some J Concepts JCT blue compound monster truck tires. These tires have a really good scale look, and that's something that I kind of like. I'm not racing, so I don't care about traction as much. I'm not worried about what grip I'm going to get on different surfaces and so on. I just like the look of these tires, so that's what I chose for the project. The tires are mounted to some J Concepts tribute wheels with the J Concepts blue bead locks that match the paint job really well. I have these wheels set up with the widest offset possible just to have some clearance for the front end and gives the truck a little extra stability. Steering is handled by a Spectrum 6280 metal housing metal gear servo. The engine is a Toyan inline twin 4-stroke nitro engine, and the truck was basically designed and built around this. And this is the exact engine that Greg Vogel from RC Driver featured in his video. I wanted to have a little fun with this engine, so I decided to make a custom air cleaner that looks like a blower assembly to give the engine more of a scale look. So I've been working on a project where I'm going to build a super scale solid axle monster truck, and I designed an entire engine around that project. So I took sections of that assembly and modified them, and then I made an air cleaner out of it. So of course the assembly looks like a blower and a scoop, and inside is a foam air filter element. It's attached to the engine through a custom plate, and the plate itself is attached to the head of the engine. And it's all 3D printed through Shapeways. The air from the air cleaner gets to the carburetor through some rubber tubing and a custom 3D printed part that I designed specifically for this setup. Now, if I'm being honest, I really didn't like the carburetors that came on this engine. They're rotary carbs, and rotary carbs in general just aren't very responsive. And the design of the carburetors, honestly, weren't very good. They kind of missed the boat on a lot of features, like the fittings, and they didn't open and close smoothly, and there were a lot of issues there I just didn't want to deal with. And on top of it, quite honestly, I don't want to deal with two carburetors when tuning an engine. I just want to deal with one. So I basically took those carburetors off, threw them away, and installed a single slide carb from one of my old 21 size two-stroke engines. And slide carbs are very smooth, and slide carbs are very responsive, and I only have to deal with one set of needles, and that's it. The carburetor is attached to the engine through a custom 3D printed piece that I designed specifically for this setup. I understand, yes, the runners that are going to the engine block are very small and therefore restrictive, but you got to remember, the hole in that engine is actually smaller than what you see, so I had to make it work. So I basically, everything bolts to the engine. It lines up perfectly with the hole in the engine. There's no overlap, there's no restriction, there's nothing like that. And it opens up to a much larger hole with a standard little carburetor nut to keep it in place. So now, not only does it do a good job of taking the air-fuel mixture from the carburetor and getting it to the engine, but it also seals very well thanks to the O-ring and a little bit of gasket sealant that I put in there. And it's kind of adjustable. If I want to rotate the carburetor a little bit, just like on a two-stroke 21 engine, I can loosen up the nut and rotate the carburetor, do whatever I got to do to get it to line perfectly, and I'm good to go. The fuel tank I chose is one from the TLR 8 series. Basically, the main reason for this choice is because it has a large capacity to feed this very hungry four-stroke engine. And two, it has a clunk inside. For those who don't know, the clunk basically just allows the fuel filter to sit the fuel no matter what angle the truck is sitting at. So if it's upside down, if it's on its side, it doesn't matter. It'll always get fuel. And also a nice thing, it has a little dam on the top, so if I have any spilt fuel, it directs it to the back of the fuel tank and down through some fuel tubing to the ground. I attached the fuel tank to the chassis using some custom 3D printed mounts. And I would love to say that this is the first time I did it, but I actually went through 3 different versions of these mounts before I got it right. In the end, the tank sits perfect. It has plenty of room between the axle and the bottom of the tank. I have it pitched down just a little bit to help with fuel pickup. And yeah, it's in there solid. One of the things I really like about this Toyan engine is that it is water cooled. I dealt with four-stroke engines in the past. They were air-cooled, and they weren't really done well enough to cool properly with any wind at all. So it was always an issue keeping them running because it would overheat. So this engine shouldn't be an issue thanks to the water cooling that it has. It has a water pump built into the engine, and they give you a radiator for it. Basically, this is like a computer radiator. And one of the things that I didn't like about this radiator was that you basically just take the fuel tubing, stick it in the top of the radiator, and that's how your water goes in and out. And I was worried about it leaking and getting air bubbles and so on, and I just did not like that setup. So I machined some pieces of aluminum that fit over the fittings perfectly, and I used a little JB weld to hold them in place, and then I put some fittings on there, some wire ties on there. Now I don't have to worry about air leaks, I don't have to worry about the tubing coming out. It's going to be good to go at all times. And this, just like the fuel tank, is held in place with some custom 3D printed mounts that I designed specifically for this chassis. A really cool feature of the Toyan engine is that it comes with a brushless motor to turn the engine over to get it started. But an overly complex series of electronics come with it to fire it up. So I basically just took all of that and threw it out the window and came up with my own system to start the engine from the radio and to ignite the glow plugs from the radio so I don't have to touch the truck at all. Laying around in a parts box from my old magazine days was a Team Orion speed control that was perfect for the job. The right size, had the right connector on it, and it's perfect for the brushless motor that comes on the Toyan engine. So I bolted it to the chassis, and now what's going on here is the speed control is going to use power from a Traxxas mini pack to fire up the engine from the radio with the third channel, like a little button. So basically I hold the button down and it'll turn the motor over until I let off the button. And then the wire for the receiver goes to the receiver and powers all the rest of the servos in the truck. So there's no need for a receiver pack. It's one mini Traxxas pack for everything. Something that really isn't fully complete yet, that you don't really see, is my full igniter system for the glow plugs. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a mini servo that you can see there on the left to hit a micro switch, and that is going to connect the AA batteries for these AA battery holders, and they're going to be connected to the glow plugs, and that'll heat it up. I know there are electronic things out there that might be easier and so on, but I don't know if they will work for this setup and what I'm trying to accomplish here. So that's why I'm doing it the old-fashioned way with a switch. It works. It's not overly complicated. It's super easy. The only downside of my system so far is these AA battery holders don't really get a good connection, so I'm not getting a good glow on the plugs. So at this point, I think what I'm going to do is just toss those and design my own mount with thicker wire so I have a good connection between the battery and the glow plugs, and that'll ignite them the way they need to be ignited. The other thing, just like the speed control, these are going to be operated with a switch, fourth channel on the radio. So I'll hit a button to engage the servo and make it hit the micro switch, and then it'll ignite the glow plugs, hit the other button to fire up the speed control on the other side and turn the engine over. And then once it's fired up and running, I can hit the top switch on the handle of my radio and shut off the glow plug AA batteries so that I don't burn them out, and the engine should run just fine. When the time came to pick a clutch for this truck, I went all out and did a complete custom job. I went with a 4-shoe TLR clutch from an 8 series buggy or truggy. The reason for that is because that clutch has 4 shoes all together, so there's more grip, more surface area. I can go from a composite shoe to an aluminum shoe. I could put 2 aluminum shoes or 2 composite shoes or whatever. And also TLR has various spring rates available, so I can fine-tune the clutch to work with this engine. Now this engine, don't forget, it doesn't rev as high as a 2-stroke engine. So the springs that are on there, I found basically the lightest springs that TLR made, put them on for the initial try of this truck. I still think at this point, I think they're going to be too stiff, but that's the nice thing. So now let's say I modify it and do something else later and I need a stiffer spring. Well, stiffer springs are available. So that's why I went with the TLR clutch for this. So I took the flywheel that they use on the TLR buggy and I machined it down so it's a little bit smaller, and I attached it to the stock flywheel with a custom made pilot nut. I needed a pilot nut because I needed to hold some bearings and a clutch bell, and a clutch bell is from TLR as well. And again, the nice thing about this is I have a range of teeth that I could pick. So right now it's in the middle range. So let's just say it's a 16 tooth. I can go up to maybe a 19 tooth or down to like a 14 or whatever. So it allows me to adjust the gear ratio in a wide way in order to get the truck to run just right. Same thing goes with the spur gear and slipper clutch underneath. That is from our Traxxas Revo, and that's the only thing besides the 2-speed from a Revo. It's all a custom transmission. I'll get to that second. But the spur gear is a Revo spur gear, and again, it's in the middle of the range that I can choose from, and it has a Revo slipper clutch, so I can have a little bit of protection for the drivetrain. So yeah, it's in the middle. So now if the truck doesn't launch well off the line, I could gear it down a little bit, or if it's not fast enough, I can gear it up a little bit. Whatever I need to do to get the truck to work just the way I want it to, it's all geared perfectly in that way. 4-stroke engines do not need a tuned exhaust to run properly like a Nitro 2-stroke engine. So I was able to have a little bit of fun with this truck and come up with a cool scale functional exhaust system. Now this is a 3D printed plastic from Shapeways, and trust me, I know it gets hot. It shouldn't melt. I did my research and I found that the temperature that this plastic can withstand is pretty high. So we should be good to go. But yeah, in the end, I love the look of the headers that I have. I got one on each side and they're both fully functional. A custom 3D printed manifold, some rubber tubing, and a 3D printed tube structure is what I use to get the exhaust from the engine down to the custom scale exhaust that I put together. And again, it should hold up just fine temperature-wise. I don't see it being an issue. I mean, the little bit of testing I've done so far, it hasn't really affected the plastic at all. So I think we're good to go. I even included a pressure fitting to pressurize the tank and help fuel flow to the carburetor. When the engine arrived, it was much longer than I anticipated, and that made it very difficult to fit between the frame rails of the stock Losi LMT. So I had to come up with something else, and I had to do a lot of thinking to figure this one out, quite honestly. In the end, I made a custom carbon fiber twin plate section in the center. And it could be a little bit more fancy with cutouts and so on, but I wasn't even sure if this was going to work, so I just went with the simple design. And it is a 1/2 inch longer and a 1/2 inch wider to be able to fit this engine. And the engine is attached to the chassis through some slots in the side and some spacers. And the reason why there's slots there is so I can adjust the height of the engine and then therefore adjust gear ratio or gear mesh and my gear ratios. So it has 3 spacers on each side, 3 slots on each side, and that allows me to move the engine up and down with ease. Carbon fiber plates on the left and the right hand side of the chassis give me a place to mount the speed control, the battery for the truck, the receiver, the throttle servo, the AA batteries, and so on. The spur gear and slipper clutch are attached to a top shaft that goes into a custom transfer case, I'll call it. The transfer case itself is made out of 3D printed material from Shapeways, and inside I designed it to accept pinion gears. It was the easiest way to make everything happen. There's some bearings in there, some spacers, bunch of pinion gears, and this, unlike most transmissions, actually gears up to make up for that low RPM of the 4-stroke engine. So yeah, I mean, so far it works really well. It's really pretty beefy, and as you can see, it is a very tight fit. The transfer case has an output shaft that goes from the bottom back side of the transfer case into this center transmission housing. The center transmission housing has a Traxxas Revo 2-speed inside. You know, like all Nitro engines, you really need a 2-speed to kind of get it going up to a good amount of speed, and this one's no different, but I think the shift point's going to have to be a lot quicker. So that'll take some time to get the adjustment right because I don't have access to the 2-speed like you do in like a Revo transmission housing. So I have to take it all apart, make my adjustment, put it all back together. I'll make a wild guess at it, make an adjustment. Hopefully it'll be good right out of the box. If not, I've got some time on my hands to get that transmission to shift right. But yeah, that's what's inside the center transmission housing. The brake system consists of 2 steel discs with carbon fiber brake pads, and the discs are attached to the drivetrain through a custom-made hex that I machined specifically for this transmission. All right, this is the point in the video where I say, and here we see it in action. But that is not going to happen, and I'm going to tell you why. Because I still have some things to work on this truck. It is, in a way, a prototype. So there are some things that I need to do, some tweaks that I want to make in order to get it to run like I want it to run for you to see. I don't want it to just putt around, as that's lame. Okay, yeah, great, it works. But it's going to be putting around, and it might have some issues where the clutch is slipping and so on. So what I found when I fired it up are a couple things. One, I need to learn how to tune a 4-stroke Nitro engine. Now that is a little bit different from a 2-stroke. I've literally tuned and run hundreds of 2-stroke Nitro engines, no problem there, but a 4-stroke is very different. So I have to learn what the engine wants, what the tune needs, and so on. So I need to figure out how to tune the engine. Then I have a problem with the clutch. Now, even though I have heavy, or not heavy, but I have grippy aluminum shoes and the lightest springs I can get from TLR, the problem I have is that it's not engaging. The clutch itself isn't engaging until almost full throttle. So there's going to be 2 things happening there. One, it's not going to go anywhere until it's full throttle, and it's going to be pretty weak. 2, the clutch shoes, because they're not fully engaging, they're going to slip. So the engine isn't going to give the truck that oomph that I'm looking for off the line. So I need to take the shoes. Right now, my buddy Ed Cable, I'm going to give him the aluminum shoes. He's a machinist and very good at doing that. And he's going to drill out the aluminum shoes, and we're going to put slugs in there. I don't know if we're going to go with steel slugs or tungsten. Not tungsten, is it tungsten? But anyways, we're going to put some slugs in there to make the shoes a little bit heavier to help them come out at lower RPM, so that when I just touch the throttle, the clutch will engage and the truck will move. The other problem I'm having right now are the brakes. The brakes are very, very grabby, and they work fantastic. I just have to work on getting the spacing right so that they're not grabbing when I'm off throttle. Right now, they're kind of rubbing a little bit, slowing things down. And then the other thing I have to work on is the 2-speed. I'm not 100% sure where the setting of the 2-speed is, so I have to get that set correctly, and I have to mess with it a little bit. And the sad thing is I wasn't smart enough to put a hole through the transmission so I could just adjust the screw for that. So I have to take the transmission apart, make the adjustment, put it back together, and hope everything works. So there are some things that I want to do to get the truck right, so that when you do see it, you go, holy cow, instead of, oh, okay, great, it runs. You know, it does run. But it doesn't run like I want it to. So I'm going to take the time to work on the truck and get things dialed in and get it to run really well. And then when the time is right, and that might not be tomorrow and it might not be next month, I will do a video of the truck actually working in action, and it will be with the RC Driver YouTube channel. Greg and I are going to work on that together, so you'll see that hopefully, you know, I don't know, I'm not going to say soon, but hopefully you will see it, and everything will run just like I want it to. According to all the math that I did and all the calculations and so on, this truck should run as good as the stock truck on 2S LiPo. So we'll see what happens. I'm going to work on it, get everything dialed in, and then we will have a running video for you on the RC Driver YouTube channel.